Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you may be in the world. Thank you all so much for joining us today for the Global Blockchain Business Council and Sovrin Foundation's Fireside Chat on the next frontier self-sovereign digital identity. So my name is Sophia Arend, and I'm the Global Blockchain Business Council's Communications and Content Lead. For those of you who aren't familiar, the GBBC is the leading global industry association for the blockchain technology ecosystem, with over 250 institutional members and 130 ambassadors from over 70 jurisdictions and disciplines. The Sovrin Foundation, our partner for this event, is a nonprofit organization established to administer the governance framework governing the Sovrin Network, which is a public service utility enabling self-sovereign identity on the internet, which we'll hear more about today. So our chat today will focus on self-sovereign digital identity and feature insights from Racina Tilleman, GBBC's COO, Arnaud Broly, Global Blockchain Lead for CETA, Chris Rajkowski, Executive Director for the Sovrin Foundation, and James Loperfido, Director of Business Development for Tangem. The session will be moderated by Sumaran, Director of Strategy and Business Development at Sovrin. So we look forward to a great discussion. As this is a fireside chat, we welcome your questions at any point during today's conversation. You can enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and Sumaran will take them throughout. So thank you to our speakers. I will now hand things over to Sumaran to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. And hello, everyone, for this fireside chat. I just want to share some personal experience before I start. Isn't it ironic that our identities are not chosen by us, even including our names? Our names are given by our parents, our caretakers, our driver license, passports, and everything is issued by our governments. Yet we are ready, or we are asked to kind of present our identities at every where we go. Even in the Zoom login, you're asked to give your email ID to verify that it is you who's joining. So I feel that identity is the gateway to every transaction in the world. And with that introduction, let's start that how digital identities would make a difference in the coming time. So just straight diving without further ado, straight diving into my first question for the panelist is, what are the pressing issues of the public and private sector because of the absence of privacy preserving secure IDs? Or what are the business problems that we are trying to solve here?
Thank you so much for having us, and looking forward to this conversation. I think it's important to point out that 1 billion people around the world still lack an official ID. And that really prevents them from accessing so many different services, from financial services to government services. Half of these people are in Africa. And over the last year, in response to the pandemic, we've seen most jurisdictions implement different social protection measures, but they have really struggled to reach and identify individuals who don't exist within that kind of formal capacity with a formal identity. And good digital ID systems not only enhance the capacity of governments and firms to operate, but they also can really protect public health and wellness. And in some countries, digital ID systems have enabled authorities to identify populations much more reliably and efficiently. And especially when we think about the last year, think about direct cash transfers and opportunities to identify individuals needing vaccinations. There are so many different use cases that can be facilitated by digital ID. I think there are a couple of really cool examples. Chile used their digital ID system to enroll millions of new beneficiaries in social programs. And in Thailand, you had a similar process where you really saw the value of digital ID. Not saying any of those existing systems are perfect, but especially where I'm located in the United States, you can see what different things might be facilitated by better digital identity systems. And I think it's exciting also to realize that this isn't something that jurisdictions need to try for the first time. There are models around the world which exist. They can be perfected. They can be, of course, improved upon, but you have places like India, like Singapore, like Estonia, who have very effective digital ID systems, and jurisdictions which haven't yet adopted those types of solutions are missing out in so many different ways.
Thank you, Marcina.
Yeah, and maybe kind of following up on that from maybe a different perspective in the, where are we now with digital identity, and that the internet essentially, and this is, I think this is from Christopher Allen, probably on the order of 10 or 20 years ago. He's a famous digital identity expert, and that the internet essentially developed without an identity layer. And that wasn't done on purpose. It was done because technology moves quickly, and people 20 years ago, probably at least those that were not visionaries, weren't realizing that this identity layer is going to be critical as there is business transacted electronically. And of course, 20 years ago, there was much less business transacted. So as technology has raised ahead, and now many of us almost live our entire lives digitally, financial transactions, business, social, et cetera, it has taken a while for our expectations of good identity to catch up with the technology and to participate with us on the internet. And that's really what has come together over especially the last 5 years, with robust privacy protecting digital identity systems becoming available. And SSI, or self-sovereign identity, is aims to be a leader in that area in protecting an individual's privacy and security of their identity credentials. And that's what we're here, of course, to talk about today. Sovrin, as a foundation, as a not-for-profit, champions the SSI version, you might say, or model of digital identity. But and great work has been done by Sumaran and my colleagues over the last 5 years, and we're fortunate to stand on their successes. But the next step is why we're especially happy to be working with GBBC, which is having this technology move into the commercial space. It's one thing for it to exist with a group of experts as it's developed in its early days, but now it's matured. And organizations like CETA, like Tangem, like GBBC are the ones that are going to bring it around the world and make it available for everyone with Sovrin's support in the background, I would almost say.
Sure, yeah, and I'd be happy to add to that, Chris. And ironically, my preparation for this webinar was reading those 10 principles that Christopher Allen wrote about SSI so long ago. And traveling on the subway in New York City this morning, where social distancing is now but a joke, it reminded me of the importance of portability. Obviously, we've all lived through COVID and have seen what our freedoms being removed from us feels like. And I think that privacy is one of those freedoms that is very tangible right now. And just ensuring that there's a set of standards that allows everybody in the world to travel freely, right? And, enhance their perspective by observing how other things are done, right, is extremely valuable. And I think that's why initiatives like this and what the GBBC is doing is so important, because it brings together a variety of perspectives. And through that variety of perspectives, we can find the best compromises between transparency and privacy, right? And the advent of asymmetric encryption and technology, and the tailwinds that decentralization on the back of Bitcoin and all of these networks is providing for this, I think creates a really good confluence of events and things that are happening to really create mass adoption. And it has to be on a popular level, right? And so that's generally, I think, the challenge with SSI is that although it encourages people to take ownership individually of their rights and how they distribute their personal data, education is, I think, the first step. So hopefully this is a good example where we can begin shaping those standards, both, with respect to corporations and government bodies, but also I think the general populace.
I have two questions in the chat, in the Q&A box. The first is, can you define self-sovereign identity in very simple terms? So I'll take that first, and then I'll take the first question, which came, so that people can understand who are not well-versed with the concept. Chris, you would like to take that question?
Sure, I thought you wanted to take that, okay. So this is one of the good and challenging things about SSI is that there's always, the first question is, what is SSI? Because it's not intuitively obvious on the surface. To begin with, first of all, we think of SSI as one of the models of how digital identity is used for us on the internet. And when we say model, there are all sorts of technology stacks behind different ways of having our identity on available to us electronically. But SSI is a model that really focuses on the person. It's the person-centric digital identity model where privacy and security are the primary concerns and the primary factors, where an individual can control their identity documents. Now, there's an important detail there is like, we don't often own our digital identity documents, for example, our national IDs and driver's licenses. But in the model of SSI, what is put forward is that individuals should be able to control the use of that without being monitored, surveilled, etc., by other authorities. So SSI is actually more focused on the principles in the philosophy of good, safe, private, privacy-respecting identity versus any technology stack that may be behind it.
Thank you, Chris. Just to kind of add here, because I'll just say what it means to me, that if I'm going to a pub or a bar, then I just don't have to say what my age is. I would just need to prove that I'm 18 years older. For me, that is the simple explanation.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sumron, and that's, I think, is something that brings it home for people to understand it. But another point is thinking about if we have our passports and I can walk down the street and show that passport to somebody and nobody's surveilling me. I can show them whatever I want on that passport. Versus in many current digital identity systems, a corporation or a government might know everything that you're doing with your data. And that is exactly what SSI means to improve, I would say, is giving control back to individuals.
Thank you. The second question in the chat is, what would be the practical steps for someone to take, whether private identity, security, or concerning business or commercial related matters?
Can you just repeat that? Sorry, Sumron.
Oh, sorry. What are the practical steps for someone to take concerning private identity, security, or concerning business or commercial related matters?
Yeah, well, I'll take a quick stab at that. Having my Facebook login information leaked last month and having forced to change all of my passwords and logins for just about all of the hundreds that I have. The first step is taking ownership of your personal security, right? There's all sorts of tools out there like 1Password. There's plenty of startups working on the problem of actually creating passwordless recognition, and biometrics infused with SSI and digital identity protocols and standards represents, I would say, probably the most frontier technology with respect to how you tackle this problem for yourself. But most importantly is understanding where your data is and how it's secured, right? So, when you're signing these disclosure or terms and services agreements, when you sign up for a social media platform and you don't read the fine print, you can safely assume that your data is being shared widely and in not such a secure fashion. And so I think that by first of all, taking ownership and custody of your personal data and security is the first step. And you can't do that without understanding it. So go and start reading and educating yourself is my first recommendation. It's taken me a few years to really understand what's going on. So start now. And I think beyond that, it's just being conscientious of what you share with people and why, right? It's very easy for the sake of convenience, right, to give all of your data away when you're applying for insurance for your home or your car or whatever it is that you might need to buy, right? But just being aware of the new tools that are coming about, especially ones that involve asymmetric cryptography, extremely useful, and they don't necessarily have the trade-offs between privacy and security, right? And that's kind of the direction that we all need to kind of generally go. But I'll cut myself off there. And I think Arnaud, you probably have some very interesting takes on this, given your commercial applications that you've been developing and implementing in the real world.
I was actually going to ask Arnaud about that what are the, because he's kind of into the travel space, what is the future? How will digital identity play a role in digital economy going forward?
So yeah, so hi everyone, and a bit sorry for joining late. So digital identity definitely has an absolutely great role to play in travel industry. So if today, if you look at so you know what's happening, we believe that digital identity is kind of part of a digital transformation that we have in the industry. And for travel and hospitality, it's an absolutely key area. If you look at all the congestions which happen at airport, airlines, in all the travel, processes, so moving into a digital, digital processing and digital identities. So we imagine that this moving into digital will bring a lot of efficiencies. But above that, and without entering into details, digital identity is kind of answering of kind of contributes to this kind of a big issue that we have today, which is about COVID-related problems. And when we talk about digital identities, meaning digital certificates, digital health certificates, and related matters, what we think is that there is a way that moving into digital identity for health-related matters is a way that hopefully would enhance and would bring, I would say, a bit more, efficiencies in a way that we can see that each and individuals would, by proving where they come from, making sure that all of the testing that they get, especially with regard to health, will be contributes in a way to bring trust across governments that the travel will facilitate and the economy will be ease through this kind of this means. But I'm sure that we can go into details a bit later.
Thanks, Arnaud. Marcina, a question for you too, because I heard in GBBC summit last week that digital identity is a key component of digital economy. So from your perspective, how do you see that progressing, that how digital identity would actually play a role? I know you mentioned that in your starting question, but I would want you to please elaborate on it further.
Of course. Well, at a high level, as far as I'm concerned, digital identity provides a foundation upon which so many other applications and systems can be built. But put another way, without effective digital identity solutions, many critical upgrades to our digital infrastructure aren't possible. It's kind of integral to so many of the services that make up the fabric of our everyday lives. We need to prove that we are who we say we are. And they're in different capacities. I mean, you think of Uber, for example. Just to get into an Uber, you need to have proven that you are who you say you are. And there are different ways, of course, to do that. But moving forward, I think digital ID will play as large a role in our everyday functioning as traditional infrastructure items like roads and bridges have paid over the last century, and payments and integrating digital ID with different payment solutions will be part and parcel to that. We have various models of it, and I'm not going to purport to have kind of the solution, but although it's not a panacea, I view digital ID as kind of the linchpin to so many of these other solutions that we've been pushing for in our efforts to promote digital infrastructure and really digital upgrades across the board.
Thank you, Martina. Sorry.
Maybe just wanted to make maybe one comment. Part of the question was, I think, what can individuals do to be more responsible, protect themselves? And I would say, I think to some extent or a large extent, we need to turn that question around and say, individuals should trust their identity issuers and trust those authorities. And I think that's part of what we as the organizations here aim to do, is make sure that organizations are trusted. And if they're following basic principles, for example, principles of SSI, an individual can trust those organizations without having to read 5 or 50 pages of terms and conditions. So it almost, we need to turn the trust back to the organizations that are using and issuing identities, instead of everybody being concerned that as soon as they give up some of their data, it's going to go out and be monetized, not to their benefit. So it's more of a, I think we need more trust in the organizations, which is what Sovrin helps to bring, as well as the organizations here, and have people less concerned about my data is always going to be monetized with everybody I give it to.
Yeah, I would just quickly to further that, Chris, I think, to your point, people don't know that it's happening at scale. It's for us, we know exactly kind of what's going on, but people don't realize kind of what's going on behind the scenes. I like to use the example of your genetic data, for example. There are companies that are providing DNA tests and will give you some type of data back to you so you could learn about yourself, but then are you giving up your rights to control and own that data and what is done afterwards, right? And so I think, in the health space, obviously it's a hot topic with respect to COVID, but beyond the immediate pressing needs that COVID presents, there is very big implications in the healthcare space, right? And you have these new technologies like zero knowledge proofs and federated learning, where aggregation of data in an anonymized way can benefit so many people so quickly, that if these rules are established by trusted issuers and those trusted issuers cooperate through the correct standards, then we will see applications that benefit everybody tremendously and very quickly if done properly. So I just wanted to add that I totally agree, Chris. The issuers need to be trusted, and the transparency needs to be fixed at the level of authority, right? For people to trust a centralized institution in any form, that centralized institution should be as transparent as possible. And I think that there's certainly a lack of that today. And it can be changed very quickly if people cooperate.
Thank you, James. I'll take a lead from Chris's response. So a question for both Martina and Chris, because you mentioned both GBBC and Sovrin. What is the strategic focus of both these organizations to advance this adoption of digital identity in the coming times? And how the partnership between GBBC and Sovrin would result into that?
So GBBC is, as our name might suggest, a very global organization. We have members in over 70 jurisdictions worldwide. And every year we choose kind of a strategic agenda. This year we have 3 main items: digital infrastructure, sustainability and resilience, and our global standards mapping initiative. And those are all kind of interrelated. And I would say that digital identity is a theme throughout each of those priorities. But one of the major initiatives that we have been working on, which highlights digital identity specifically, is this third goal, our global standards mapping initiative. And I know standards aren't the most exciting or sexy topic, but they are absolutely essential if we're going to move the industry forward. And the Global Standards Mapping Initiative is an effort that we announced about a year ago. It was initially in partnership with organizations like the World Economic Forum and MIT and Accenture, but has since grown to include many, many more organizations. I think we did a head count and there are over 200 individuals from different organizations supporting the initiative now. And the effort is really to catalog all of the existing standards related to blockchain related applications. And this year, we have 9 working groups, and digital identity is one of the working groups. We're really grateful to have James and Arnaud co-chairing that working group. But their goal is to, first of all, understand what the ecosystem currently looks like, to provide information that allows for a comparative analysis of what different jurisdictions are doing, what are the standards that exist, so that hopefully we can craft a more coherent path forward. In our conversations with regulators and decision makers around the world, the thing that they want most is clear information that allows them to make decisions from a place of actual understanding, as opposed to being forced to, be very reactionary based on potentially negative news that they see. And so hopefully GSMI version 2.0 will facilitate that. And we're really excited to see the work that comes out of that group.
Thank you, Matthews.
So a quick response, hopefully a quick response from my side. So the sovereign vision, of course, is identity for all. And certainly there is a fair amount of focus on, for example, the global south in developing regions of the world and helping people that maybe don't have identity to be able to have a robust privacy protecting and secure digital identity. But in terms of, what is Sovrin's, say, focus for this year and strategy for this year, while those activities are ongoing, the mission is really how do we support the adoption of SSI as rapidly as possible globally? And that's part of why we're here today and why we're happy to be involved with these organizations. For example, cooperating with CETA, there's almost no better way of helping SSI to spread around the world than having a global organization like CETA that is promoting and actually the use of digital identity, especially in the SSI model, for global travelers. That touches everybody in the world. With Tangem, that's another great example. Of course, while many of us here have our fancy smartphones and we can hold our identities there, we're excited to work with Tangem because in some places in the world, the infrastructure may not exist, or that those smartphones may be too expensive for people. Working with Tangem and smart cards, we can bring secure, privacy respecting digital identity to people in the form of smart cards at a much lower cost, but still with the security standards that we would expect for anybody anywhere in the world. So from the Sovrin point of view, we're very excited to work with global companies bringing digital identity forward. And that's also, of course, why GBBC is a great partner in touching all these organizations around the world and helping to bring not only the good news and good activities of blockchain, but the identity portion of that. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll pause for a minute. Sorry, Arnaud and James. I can see chat really, warming up. But I would request the audience if you can shorten the questions, because for me it's becoming too much to read and at the same time focus on the responses by the panelists. So if you have questions and if you can put it in a line, that would help me to take up your questions. Sorry, James and Arnaud, since GSMI initiative was mentioned, can you please elaborate that, what it would mean and how people can participate?
Sure. I think Rosina summarized it very well, right? By the very definition of something that is global in nature, there's going to be fragmented efforts to establish best practices, the best user experience, the most accessible format, right? And so just understanding what's going on in each country, in each state, in each city is an enormous challenge in and of itself, right? But the beauty of this work now is that through interoperability, we can travel safely and easily and securely and with as much privacy as practicality allows for, right? So I think not just from that perspective, I also want to mention that, the GBBC and the Sovrin Foundation are not-for-profit organizations, right? And I think it's very important that incentives are aligned, right, with the advent and adoption of this technology. And so the importance of self-sovereignty is in that you are the custodian of your own identity, right? And that you choose to share what you want to share when you want to share it. And so having the right organizations behind it at the start, I think is absolutely critical for adoption. Beyond that, I think that there's also tremendous cost efficiencies when you have 100 startups across the world trying to solve the same problem when engineering and developer talent is in such high demand, right? So if you have people working on the same problem through the same standards, you create not only efficiencies and costs, but much more rapid implementation, right? So in part of mapping what entities are doing which things in different places, we can at least share information and knowledge so that there aren't redundant efforts and waste, right? To me, that's very important. Just, from a practical perspective in the technology and startup space, having traveled around the world in 2018 to see the ICO bonanza where people were doing all of these projects, right? Some of them honest in their efforts and others maybe not. But what I did notice was that many different startups were all trying to solve very similar problems, right? And if you can share this data and information on a global scale, it'll make creation of these standards and adoption of them that much quicker, right? Which is something that we all want to see. So that's just my 2 cents, but I think Arnaud has a very good handle on the practical implementations of this stuff.
Yeah, and thank you, James. I mean, if there is maybe one of the few positive things of this disastrous pandemic, which really is a nightmare for everyone, is maybe that the call for SSI framework, because if I look at what's happening in the travel industries, there is really few, I would say, kind of technologies and framework which really support building trust between governments, and this one is really a blockchain-based self-sovereign identity framework. Because how, as a government, you can trust that these passengers, those citizens coming from outside countries, will come into your countries safe and clean with regard to the pandemic, and vice versa. How you can make sure that I mean, the citizen and the people travelers from your countries would go around and how you can make sure with regard to a partner government that they would be clean with regard to these kind of problems. It's really a sensitive topic, and is one of maybe the positive things, at least for SSI, is that it has been recognized as enablers across governments to build trust between them, and that's really a key things. because no one wants to send and receive the passengers with this level of sensitivities, and how to make sure that the tests, the vaccinations, the PCR tests would be proven from reputable labs. And fortunately, this kind of technologies is really helping government again to build trust and to bring aircraft back to the skies, and hopefully enable the business and exchange as we know it used to be before.
Travel is one of the use cases, but again, a question for all the panelists here. What are the other commercial and non-commercial use cases that would drive the adoption for digital identity?
Real quick, and thanks for bringing that up, Sovrin. I'm also seeing a question in chat of, are there any POCs of distributed identities happening? Essentially the same question. But I think first, it's important for everybody here to understand that, of course, there are actually many POCs and development efforts going on in digital identity and SSI. But in fact, we're far beyond that stage already. There are governments and commercial companies that are using SSI today for important live production use cases. As an example, in the UK, the National Health Service, NHS, is issuing credentials, verifiable credentials in the SSI model to medical professionals so that they can prove their licenses, their certificates to work in certain situations, certain hospitals. In Canada, the government has rolled out services for identifying companies and people on a provincial level using verifiable credentials following the SSI model. And there's much more of that coming this year. On the commercial side, there's a group in North America called Bonify, and they're using SSI and verifiable digital credentials to prove the identity of their customers, so that when they make a phone call to the bank, the person on the other side, the bank, actually this is for credit unions, know they are talking to a legitimate person with the correct identity. So this is actually far beyond the POC use case in activities in fintech, healthcare. Government issued identity documents are live today, and we see that growing considerably, especially last year and this year.
Hasina, anything from you?
Well, another one that I would offer, which I think we've all probably struggled with at one point or another, is in the academic sphere. Proving academic credentials, getting a copy of your transcript that actually is a legitimate record of your academic achievements has been a headache for me, at least, and I think for many others. And there are many different institutions and governments also working in that realm. Another thing maybe to highlight is that the last year has moved so many of the systems that we've usually used in person online, which adds an additional element of complexity when it comes to proving you are who you say you are. I think of healthcare, and I have never before the last year had a teledoc appointment. I think so many of us are probably in that boat, and that's another area where progress is being accelerated by necessity. I don't think these conversations would be where they are if we hadn't experienced a real need for a reset in a lot of these systems, recognizing that the status quo and what we were used to was really not good enough.
Thank you, Mercine. And with my own experience, one of our members, IDRAM, they actually created a platform integration with, the verifiable credentials integration with actually these meeting platforms. So that was a really, again, a very nice use case to kind of adopt, like, you have verifiable credentials to enter any meeting that you're invited for. So moving on, since there's a lot of mention, and I do see a question, how does this public and private partnerships look like for the adoption of a digital identity? And there's a related question, what impact does it have on politics? So I would not take that question, but a kind of a variation of that how does public and private partnerships look like for adoption of digital identity?
Maybe quickly to kick it off, and I'm also especially interested to hear Arnaud's comments coming from Singapore, where there's a lot of activity in this space, and the government is, I would say, very productively involved with commercial public-private partnerships. But from what we see in the Sovrin Foundation, for example, places especially like Germany and Canada, on the public side, the government is has woken up and seen the potential and the need for digital identity and the importance of it being user-centric and privacy respecting and protecting. And there's where the SSI model comes in. So we see the governments putting money behind projects and businesses, as well as issuing digital identity documents into secure wallets. That partnership with the private side, there are private companies so providing the infrastructure to support that, but also having these core identity documents issued by the government in digital format enables new business models. For example, for CETA, for others that need to recognize people based on trusted identity documents. The gold standard for trust is a government issued identity document. And that is also going to be true in the digital identity space. And as has been commented, we're in the middle of a situation where global travel, even regional travel, has been disrupted, and it will open up based on trusted digital identity with certain types of credentials that may indicate a person's health status. And I think CETA, Arnaud, you're in the middle of all of this right now and helping to open up the world again.
Yeah, no, and thanks, Chris. I totally agree about what you say. So, Soma, whatever we want to do, at the end of the day, even if it is the big momentum for SSI, self-sovereign identity-based solutions, it still really remain a government-centric decisions to go for it, to adopt it. And certainly we'll talk about that later, because maybe not all government has the same view about how we should be, how it could be structures, what kind of schema should be used, and these kind of things. But definitely what we see is that the governments adopted this kind of framework to create, secure travel credential to be accepted, and not only by airlines, but as well the tourism, members, hotel, hospitalities, and these kind of things. So there is, I think, we see a good synergies between government and public sectors. Government by adopting the technology and this kind of way of going, and this kind of way to build trust, and the public sectors bringing different kind of solutions, which lead, by the way, other kind of challenges. So it's very rich. It's a rich ecosystem. We see as well in this part of the world, as you mentioned, Chris, Singapore. So in Asia as well, some government-based champions to develop and to continue on this kind of area. But yeah, I think we do think that's the beginning of the journey. And at the end of the day, it's a cross-government trust to be enabled to this kind of technologies, which has to be adopted in order, again, to facilitate travels and go back to the normals. And that's really important in our area.
Marcina, your take on the both the public and the private sector partnerships for adoption of digital identity?
I would just reiterate what Arnaud said. Although many of these private sector solutions are very compelling and they're essential to the evolution of this infrastructure, governments play an absolutely pivotal role in the actual ubiquitous adoption of these solutions. And we spend a lot of time working to educate governments about the potential here. Also underscoring the fact that poorly executed ID systems can really exacerbate some of the existing inequities and data security challenges. And so there's a lot to be sorted out in terms of the architecture of these solutions. They need to be done right. And it's an interesting conversation, about who the onus is placed on in terms of ownership of that data, or how exactly it's configured. But it's really a time for governments to make sure that they have the right information if they're going to move forward with these types of solutions.
Thank you, Marcina. For James, not there is a question that they would like to hear projects or what Tangem and Sita have done in this space. I know, Anod, you did describe briefly, but James, would you like to talk about what are the projects underway at Tangem?
Sure. So, initially Tangem was essentially aimed for payments use cases. But being that the chips that we will, have been purchasing from a third party, but will actually soon be manufacturing ourselves, have storage capacity. You can physically store verified credentials in a tiny chip, right, that you can carry on your person and be the holder of and presenter of, be verified even in offline environments with no additional infrastructure besides a smartphone on behalf of the verifier. So for instance, one pilot that we're looking to get off the ground in either Kenya, I think Guatemala is one of the other options, and even Vanuatu, places where internet access, smartphone ownership is certainly not ubiquitous. We can actually provide self-sovereignty in a very physical form, right? Where someone can be issued credentials, right, by a trusted issuer, have a physical manifestation securely enveloping those verified credentials, and then the opportunity to selectively disclose them to a trusted or a needed or necessary verifier of those credentials, right? So we're just getting started in the identity space, but we realized that all of the same technology that we were leveraging for payments technology is very well suited for digital identity. And obviously, this isn't a secret if you're paying attention to the space. There's very much a likelihood between identity and payments, right? Because in providing a payment, as long as that account or ledger that you write to can be proven to be associated with your person, then you authenticate a transaction with just your identity, right? So there's almost certainly a convergence between identity and payments in that way. And I expect to see more of that, especially with the proliferation of retail central bank digital currencies. A previous company that I worked for is also a GBBC member, Soramitsu, was able to issue identity in a unique way just through smartphones, so that anybody with a telephone number could open up a bank account and have access to banking infrastructure in very rural communities in Cambodia. And so to me, those are some of the most interesting projects, right, where there's such a tremendous lack of infrastructure that some interesting technology advancements can allow these people to really leapfrog and catch up with the rest of the developed world. And I think probably the most interesting thing that I've seen is the ability to disintermediate food and aid distribution in developing nations, right? Where historically there's been massive transaction costs and fees associated with that, which can now be negated through technologies like this. So I think that's a very good place for us to start.
And there's a very interesting question in the chat, and I would like to take that up. They're saying that in the world or in the countries where the technology is or access to smartphones is not that great, how do you think governments will perceive a digital identity that not only consists of a government issued ID, but also some form of completeness score around personal, medical, and bio records to eventually help governments understand the value of digital identity?
I'm happy to take a stab at that. It's something that I've looked at in depth just through Tangent's business development efforts. And the idea being is that a lot of, I mean, personally, I've experienced this myself, right? I don't have a singular point of access to all of my health data, even if I wanted one right now, right? Which I think is a tremendous problem. Every time I have to go to a new doctor or a special, a specialist, I have to find where the information is, or I don't even know how they themselves access it, right? That's a problem. And obviously, there are databases where hospitals and doctors share information, and electronic health records are improving on a daily basis, right? But why shouldn't you have immediate access and control to all of the data that is associated with you, right? And so, especially simply establishing digital identity so that you can then ascertain all of that other information and at least know how it's portrayed to others is the first step, right? So, people that don't have a smartphone can now have a non-paper way of holding at least some of this data and the ability to anchor it to the rest of it where it's securely stored, right? And so, I know that's a mouthful and a lot to comprehend, but the point is the simplicity of the user experience and ability to provide the same access to people where there's language barriers, lack of internet, lack of smartphones, that's coming to fruition now. So a long-winded answer. I'm sure you guys can add to it. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay, James.
Maybe Sovrin, I may because you talk about use case and kind of thing. So on CETA perspective, definitely, and it's not a new story, even before COVID with our lab, using SSI digital identity for digital passports was really something which was in the air, because why? It's really part of the digital transformation of the industries. Remember a while ago, so we already get some demonstrators between the US and UK about how, combined with biometrics, you can ease passenger journey and processing at airports with airlines to make the flow, smoother through digital identities. And I would say that we had recently put a press release which what happened in Aruba in the Caribbean, where we're using a SSI framework not only for digital health credentials for COVID, but as well beyond that and beyond the beyond airports, how to leverage these frameworks for hospitalities, to access to other kind of services, other kind of facilities within the countries. And yeah, it's really something that we do believe is absolutely key to build trust for the air travel industries, and hopefully CETA would play a significant role on this area.
Thank you. There's one question for Sovrin, and I'm assuming that's for Chris. So there's a question that in addition to the biometric-based digital identity solutions, what more end user or owner of the ID data can do to adopt or custody data as an option, or protect their own identity based on SSI model?
Yeah, well, again, I would say, this is really the responsibility of the organizations providing identity that must protect, especially when biometrics come into play. It is very important, excuse me, that people be able to trust the organizations issuing that identity and requesting the verification of those identity credentials. And I think governments especially have been very cautious about digitizing biometrics because of the risk of losing those biometrics for people. And this is where SSI and also Sovrin is stepping up, especially this year. And how do we help to provide secure credentials with secured biometrics, so that a verifier, they can, same as with your passport, you'll be able to show a digital credential and somebody might be able to see a person's face or have a digital verification of fingerprints, face, etc., to confirm that a particular credential is actually owned or controlled by that individual. It's not an easy case. Organizations like CETA and others spend a lot of time and effort on this, but it's something that Sovrin we hope to bring to the world this year in more securely and privately binding biometrics to credentials.
Thank you. Yes, I will take one more question. I hope that's okay, Sophia.
Oh, sure, no problem.
Okay, so how will all the technology comprising SSI solutions be supported? There are a lot of people out there who are not tech savvy.
Well, I think we've got some of the organizations here that are going to help bring that to the world. But for those with smartphones, these need to be easy to use apps on the smartphones that have standard user experiences. And there are a number of groups that are already working on that. Many of them have participation by the people here. But that user experience has to extend not just from smartphones, but to smart cards and even paper credentials that are being required by governments and global organizations. So again, it's not, the organizations need to provide the capability to us as individuals, because even the smartest people here can't go out and build their own system. We have to depend on our companies and our governments.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll just add quickly that there are a lot of organizations who are dedicating tremendous effort to create systems with user interfaces that are very simple, very easy to understand, geared specifically toward the populations who are ultimately going to be using them. I also think it's perhaps valuable to understand that our existing systems for verifying ID are not user-friendly. And so, while of course it's important to understand individuals who might have additional challenges when moving to these updated digital platforms, I think it's also helpful to recognize the real failures in our existing systems, which, whether or not you're extremely literate as far as technology is concerned, can be very challenging to navigate.
And in the interest of time, I would pause with my questions because I can see there's a lot of questions in chat still, and I had my own questions. But I would like to close this conversation first by thanking all the panelists for sharing such insights, great insights. But also, for me personally, let's join hands and collaborate together as community, because for me, community means nothing but common unity for driving the adoption of digital identity. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much to our speakers and to our moderator, and to everyone who joined us today for your insightful questions. This has been truly an excellent discussion, and clearly a discussion that could go on for much longer.